Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob. What I do here is I watch new movies. Not always brand new movies, new releases. Sometimes they're just movies that are new to me. And I've seen, I don't know, a few thousand movies at this point. I honestly don't know the real count. My IMDb ratings, if you want to go by that, I think we're looking at over 3,000 ratings. I'm looking right now. No, I take it back. 2,900. So almost 3,000. But if we look at my watch list, I've still got like another 1,600 films that I want to see someday. And some of those are classics. Some of those are new releases. Some of those haven't even come out yet. But the idea is to just watch as much as I can and kind of learn and broaden the horizons and see new stories from new voices and maybe catch up with things that just been overlooked. So that's a big thing of what we do here. Now, I say all that because this episode, I want to cover basically an entire run this year throughout the month of October. I'm recording this afterwards, but I spent pretty much the entire month of October going into this lane of horror films, but specifically found footage horror films. And I got to tell you, I didn't realize just how extensive that is. You know, I mean, I started, what really kicked this whole thing off was I wanted to see Shelby Oaks. So I'll talk about that in a little while, but that is a film that's just come out, released this year. It's written and directed by a YouTuber, a veteran YouTuber at this point, Chris Stuckman, who's done movie reviews and talked about films and talked about what makes films work in his perspective, and finally got the resources, got the time, the ability to make his own work. And to me, that's like taking it to the next level, which is great because I like to see that. I mean, I'm always down for somebody trying their hand at it. For years I was a fan of films and talked about films. And at some point, I mean, we're talking several years ago now, but at some point I decided I wanted to try my hand at it. And I made some short films and I wrote some things and I still have ideas for stuff I want to make. So seeing someone get not only to make a feature film, but to get it in theaters and to work with decent crew and cast and make a pretty suitable film for wide release, that's a big deal. And I hope that in whatever way matters, it finds some success, whether it's as a horror film or as a bridge of a person kind of being in one lane and jump into a new lane. I'll talk about the film itself later, but the thing that I knew before going into it was that it was kind of a semi found footage type story. So I looked into that, right? I said, well, wait a minute. I know a lot of found footage films. I've seen plenty over the years, whether it's horror or just the style of film in general. And some of that could be, whether you're talking about something like Cloverfield, or of course, Blair Witch Project, going back to, for me, Cannibal Holocaust, which, that it's a very tough film to watch, but it is, in my mind, one of the first kind of most distinct found footage horror films. And the fact that it kind of loops back on itself, it's probably not the right way to phrase it, but it's a film about the found footage and then the people that go to track down what happened to the people in the found footage, if that makes sense. So it's a very interesting film that approaches the style of filmmaking in a kind of a different way. Of course, it is extremely like graphic and disturbing, and so I wouldn't recommend it to just anybody if you've not seen it before. But to me, it's one of the earlier examples, and I think was that the late 70s, 80s. Uh, I think it was, yeah, 1980. That's what I'm looking at. So that aside, I mean, there are plenty of other films that use the technique, even something like Chronicle, right, which was kind of a quasi superhero film, the story. And, I just thought, well, okay, look, not only is it found footage, but it's also this sort of, this like fake documentary approach that is really kind of interesting to me. So, I started looking into this, right? I'm like, okay, what are other films that are sort of like this? And a big one for me that I've really just put off for a long time until I finally, with this, jumped in was the VHS series. This is a series of not films necessarily, but I guess anthologies, collections of short films or short stories directed by different directors with different characters in each one. And they're kind of grouped into these collections, right? And so I went down this whole lane. I mean, this is a lane of, let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven different films now, seven releases, starting back in 2012 with VHS. And sort of like maybe like Creepshow has done in the past, where there's kind of this framing story that weaves throughout the shorts. Some of these work and some of these really don't. But the interesting thing is that all of these films, VHS in 2012, VHS 2 in 2013, then we got VHS 94, 99, 85, VHS Beyond, and then just this year, VHS Halloween, which, I think a couple of those, they kind of give you the idea. Like Beyond is kind of either science fiction or sort of like a strange paranormal type stuff. And Halloween is, of course, very clearly like stories that happen on Halloween or around Halloween. I think the interesting thing is they all commit to this idea of being footage or stories that are discovered on old video tapes or in that format. So some of it is also like the treatment of the material, like the visual treatment, like the textures and the effects used to create like old VHS tapes and that sort of aesthetic, which, as someone who lived in a time when VHS was the way to watch content on TV other than television antennas, it, it's a really distinct thing. And there are some of these that I feel like are very close to what you should see. Some of them, they feel a little more like put on, like, oh, this is clearly some kind of effect or some kind of, I don't know, layer of dirt and pixelation and whatever that you're adding to this. Like it doesn't quite feel legit. But aside from that, I mean, the idea is that these are all short stories. These are all kind of self-contained. Like they don't really overlap in any way at all, other than maybe the theme. And sometimes that is a good thing. Other times, I feel like it makes for a mixed bag. You know, I think VHS and VHS 2 and maybe VHS Beyond, I think those kind of had the most, I don't know if we want to say memorable or distinct they had the most effective stories and or shorts in them. And some of these, I feel like they're a little bit derivative from some other things you might have seen in other films or even in literature or short stories. But a lot of it is about the production. And so, the other part of this is that these are framed as things that were recorded with old cameras on old cassettes. And so a lot of this is also using the found footage technique, and it's handheld, and a lot of times it's first person or even like static cameras, like security cameras or whatever. And so I, I feel like this kind of works in some ways for some stories. What's interesting also is, this goes back to 2012, this series, and you see there are a few directors, filmmakers in this that have gone on to make other films, like feature films. Like Adam Wingard, I think, is one of the kind of main drivers of at least the earlier installments, if not the first one. And of course, he's gone on to make like this big budget blockbuster Godzilla King Kong movies. And I I wouldn't have necessarily seen that track, but I think it goes to show, like, here's someone, here's a place where filmmakers and directors can test out some techniques, test out some storytelling abilities, kind of get in some practice, but also because of the nature of this type of story or the device here of VHS tapes, it can be a little rough around the edges, or it can be a lot rough around the edges, and it still passes. So I think, without getting into each of these, because each of these films has, I think, like 4 or 5 short stories in them. There are some that I feel like are very unique and well done. Others that I feel like they're a little bit kind of slapped together. Or sometimes it's not even like the quality of it, because like I said, quality is negligible with this, but it's sometimes the acting isn't quite convincing, or something about the stories are a little too, I don't know, a little too extreme. Is extreme the word? Where you kind of feel like you're just doing this to do it. You're not really doing this to tell maybe an interesting story or really convey an idea. And, some of these, I even give it this though. Some of these films are powerful in the way that they feel more like dreams, or like nightmares rather. And they have a sort of like a foggy memory quality to it. And I don't know if that's because of the nostalgia of VHS and that aesthetic, that you could say, or you could even see where, like, this looks like something that I kind of half remember. And yet, of course, it's not. So it's a really interesting it's kind of a mesmerizing thing. When you watch these all in a row, I think it really becomes apparent. If you watch them every once in a while, or if you've only seen 1 or 2 of these, it may not kind of hit you that way. But seeing them all kind of back to back, it does kind of put you in a different mind state of being in that sort of watching things through that like VHS grainy video, like haze, you know? And so, Blair Witch from 2016, this is a film that I, I think my own memory of the original film and the sort of phenomenon of it, of being so uh, like heard about and talked about, but until you saw it, you weren't really sure what you were in for and how real it was, or if it was real at all. And the way it was put together, it was convincing enough. It was just convincing enough to think this could have been a real thing that happened. for the time, and I think for Blair Witch, the 2016 update, let's say, it's not really a remake, although it kind of feels like a remake. It's more of a sequel, I suppose. But, that whole idea of sequel to the Blair Witch Project, I mean, we had that. Blair Witch 2 was a Book of Shadows or something. And, that didn't really work because it kind of abandoned what made the original film so unique. And so this Blair Witch, it kind of goes back to that, right? It tries to replicate a little bit of that. You've got a group of people that are looking into this case of basically looking into what happened in the first film. And so they set about to do kind of the exact same thing, which, it's like sometimes common sense just got to enter the room at some point and just be like, wait, it didn't work for them. Why do you think it's going to work for you? And of course, these characters all find out why. And, the film does at least a couple of things to get around the whole thing of, the sort of logic break with found footage where it becomes hard to justify how cameras are still rolling in some of these moments. And this film gives the characters these like body cam sort of like always on cameras that are rolling, and of course this is how we get the story, right? We find all this footage from all these cameras. Now the problem is, like, they've been out in the woods for a while, and so I don't know where they get the infinite storage and infinite battery life, but somehow it works in this film. And so the one thing I'll give it also is it does a little more on the back end of not resolving the story or whatever, but it gives us a little more than just like a hard cut to credits, like the first film did. We get to see a little more about what is involved, like kind of the behind the under the hood of this house or this cabin in the woods, and sort of the terrifying nature of it. The character here, played by Callie Hernandez, Lisa, that her journey throughout this film kind of doesn't seem that suspecting to begin with, but at some point at the end of the film, she's really in some really kind of horrifying spots. And one in particular for me is this moment where she's going through this tunnel. And I literally mean like a tunnel, like not like a tunnel you drive a car through, but like a tunnel that, like, uh, rodents would crawl through. It's like underground in the dirt. And you see her struggling to get through these spaces. And it's one, it just looks claustrophobic, but to see a person in this space actually struggling to get their way through it, yeah, it kind of brings out the nerves, It's not graphic necessarily, it's not gory or violent even. It's just the idea of like being in that kind of space, especially if you're like extremely claustrophobic. I could feel like this could give you some anxiety. So in that way, it's kind of effective, but I just feel like if this film would have instead just been like, you know what, let's just do a whole new story. It doesn't have to be a Blair Witch thing. It could be in another part of the world. It could be related to some other like myth or legend or folklore. And, yeah, maybe we want to do the found footage thing, maybe be accused of being like a Blair Witch ripoff, but I just feel like you should have let that one be. So let's see, what's another one here? Here's a couple others that uh, I feel like these qualify as found footage. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe. Because these are films that are using this sort of, it's not camera perspective necessarily, but it's the idea of like screen. It's basically like a screen recording. You had films like Searching from a few years back, and you had Missing, which I talked about. There were a couple films from a few years ago. One was Searching with John Cho, and another Missing from, I don't know, maybe just a couple years ago, because I know I talked about those in an episode a while back. But both of those films are from the perspective of someone's computer screen. So you're seeing their chats, you're seeing their emails, you're seeing their like FaceTime calls, you're seeing them like looking at websites. And the idea is that you're just watching somebody's point of view as they're going through this story. And in those cases, it was like trying to find somebody and using the power of the internet and communications and technology to do that. And some of it is effective, and some of it is very familiar, because those are things that we look at screens all day, every day, in some way or another. And some of those things are they're relatable. A couple of these films here, Unfriended from 2014. This is a film that, it's 2014, so it's over 10 years old. Some of the the interfaces, the UIs that are on screen look kind of dated now, but the idea is that this is about a group of friends who just do these regular not even Zoom, Skype calls. They do these Skype calls to just hang out virtually. And this was in 2014. This is like weird to think, like, was this a thing back then? Before COVID, before, remote work and all that? But this was a thing, in the film at least. And they all kind of are hanging out, and some weird things start to happen. There's a kind of mystery user on the group call. They can't seem to get this person off the call, but they're just chit-chatting at the beginning of the film. And turns out there's something else that happened that relates to all these people that is kind of coming back to haunt them. And, it's a little bit of like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, like that kind of thing, because there's actually a girl in their group that she died, she killed herself. And there was some of the people in this group, they kind of egged it on. They were part of embarrassing her and making her the butt of everybody's joke, and the humiliation, the basically, like, now you'd probably call it like cyberbullying, that they didn't take seriously, or they didn't think would have any effect on her. It ended her life. And so these group of friends now, they're starting to see all that come back through this kind of mysterious Zoom caller that is pulling up, images of them, and basically taking out some sort of vengeance on them. And, part of it is like, well, you could see this being strictly like a kind of revenge story, but the fact that there is a little bit of there is like a supernatural element to this. But the idea is that these people are very much like, regular kids that are in over their head, and they're using technology, or they're at least communicating through technology. And they're finding that, and I think this is maybe part of the idea with the film, part of the sort of, I don't know, the thesis of it is that there's a lot with technology that we take for granted, and or we really don't understand how it works. Like, it kind of is magic, And I don't mean it is magic. I mean, there are people who don't understand how these things work, because you really don't need to understand how they work. But if you do understand how they work, it can be used to manipulate, it can be used to terrorize people, right? The people that you make fun of, or you maybe even consider friends, but you mistreat, um, their lives don't necessarily go away, even if they've gone away. And it's kind of true. It's like someone passes away, their social media accounts are still out there, their email is still out there. Their online presence is still there. Now, some of these companies, they've built ways to what do you call it? Like if you pass away, you can make it so that, oh, somebody you know or somebody you trust will have access to your account, you know, sometime after you're gone, or you don't log in for 6 months or whatever it is. Right. So they have started to build ways to like hand off your accounts or your content or whatever it is to other people. But, I don't know, in 2014, if that was even a thing yet. And so, the fact that people didn't think in those terms, and maybe still don't think in those terms, uh, I feel like that says something about people's awareness or just understanding of how some of this works. So maybe that's reading way deeper into the film than was intended, but that's kind of my take on it. And another one here that I saw, which is a little bit similar but different enough, is a film called Host. And this is about a group of ladies who are setting up this Zoom call to do a like an online seance. And it's already sounds weird enough because, like, why? Well, I mean, why is seance, first of all, but also why online? Like, what? But it's explained in the film, and the film came out in 2020. It's explained like this is happening during COVID. So people can't get together. So that's also kind of an underlying thing throughout the film, this element of, you know, there's this thing out there in the world that is a problem that is killing people that we don't really understand, that we're kind of afraid of, and it's kind of kept us locked away in our homes. Sounds a little bit like a horror movie, but I think this film also it uses that to its advantage, let's say, because it tries to show us a world, which is a real world that we lived in, that a world where people are separated from each other and they don't have the same sort of connection, and they can't have the same sort of connection that they once did. And so these people that are doing these seances, I think it's like 5 ladies in this group, they are doing this a little bit as kind of a gag, like just as a thing to do. But there is also an element of like curiosity and like wanting to know like what this really is. And so when things start to happen, though, where they somehow summon or uh, cause this I don't know, presence, or it's not like a demon or whatever, but it's I guess a ghost, right? Kind of a ghost story, where their actions during the seance cause this presence to start making things happen around them. That's where I feel like, okay, it kind of goes in two different directions, where you're getting a story about people who are, one, like getting in their own head and kind of working themselves up into a panic and causing themselves to be afraid. But then you're also getting this thing where it could even be misconstrued as like the technology is screwing with them, kind of like in Unfriended. Like, wait, is the computer doing, like, is the power going? Is it the network connection? It's like, no, it's actually something else, maybe. And that sort of paranoia and that anxiety about like what exactly the hell is going on. I'm sure a lot of that had to do with like real COVID era fears and worries. But as also seen in Unfriended, like it also has to just do with the technology. There's this sort of weird haze between people these days. And it's not like a literal haze, but it's this barrier, this buffer zone of my screen through all these wires and tubes to your screen to you, right? Like that's so it's such a thing that people have not I mean, you just have to keep it in mind. Like people have not lived this way in any time in history until now, until let's say the last 10 or 15 years, especially in the last 5 years. Like I feel like it has become a way that people live their entire lives in some cases. And that's in a way that is a scarier thing than a ghost or a demon or a monster. The idea that we're living in a world that people, if the right or the wrong circumstances or actors were in play, people could start to doubt like what is really real, what they're seeing is real, because they have no reference now, right? I mean, is that like way off of what these films are talking about? But I think about like people like my kids' age or people that are younger, like in their under 20 years old, who have only grown up with this and they don't understand maybe as much the value of social interaction or just being outside, being in the world, and what that future is going to be for them. Like how is that going to change how they see things? I'm of the generation that I remember VHS tapes. I remember watching TV like with static, TV antennas and all that. I remember going to movie theaters to see movies, to watch them on your TV just whenever you want. Like what? That's not how is that even possible? And then to go and do this, record myself talking about it, and then share it with anybody in the world that wants to listen. Thanks for listening. Like, what? How is that possible? But now, I mean, these two movies are they're very much like the tip of the iceberg. But they are, I think, looking into they're exploring like what does this mean? This idea of technology and how it's between us, and does that make things scarier or does that make things easier to understand? Who knows? Um, so, all right, let me get off of these because those were, I went a little further, I think. A couple other films I saw here, I guess, kind of like the beginnings of a franchise. I don't know if these are ever going to turn into anything more, but Grave Encounters and Grave Encounters 2. Now, the reason I say I don't think these are going any further is because these movies came out in 2011 and 2012. And in my mind, these are very much kind of like knockoffs of the Paranormal Activity films, because they do kind of feel like the same thing of like security camera type stuff and handheld cameras, but it's just different enough in the sense that it's a group of people who are like ghost hunters. I guess this was right at the time those were really taking off. Those like shows about like people who are looking for ghosts or looking for haunted places and all that. And the idea that it also works with this like documentary type of beginning about someone who was looking to start a show about like ghost hunters or whatever, and this was supposed to be like an episode of that. And turned out to be like the end of all these people in this. I was like a hospital or like a mental asylum or whatever they're called. And part of it is kind of interesting. It's interesting to see like the production quality. I guess that's the word. To see like, okay, they didn't just shoot this in a house like Paranormal Activity, which could have been anybody's house. They went to this actual place, and you see this place, and you don't see the whole place necessarily, but you can tell like this wasn't shot like in some back room somewhere. So there's a level of it where it's like, okay, well, this is kind of like Paranormal Activity, but it's a little bit bigger in scope. You got more people involved. It's not just this couple in their home. It's kind of a bigger story. There's a little more like, I don't know, lore built into it, right? Of like this place that they're at and why they're there. And this is all because, there's possibly ghosts or it's haunted or whatever. And, the thing that watching these two films, and I got more to say on this in a little bit, but watching these two films, it became clear to me like the found footage stuff with ghosts, which VHS, that series, doesn't necessarily get into a lot. And none of these other films so far, but Grave Encounters and the films that I'm going to talk about in a minute, they all deal with this idea of ghosts in a place with cameras on, and somehow or another, man, ghosts just love fucking with doors. And they love stomping around and dropping things, I guess. Because those are like the three tricks that all of these films that I'm about to talk about play with constantly in every film. Let's just do it. Grave Encounters 2. Grave Encounters, it's okay, right? It's got a couple of interesting tricks up its sleeve. Grave Encounters 2, you're doing this found footage thing and you start putting like some CGI or visual effects in there, you lose me because you break the whole idea. And it's clearly like made, it's artificial. And that's the whole thing of these films is like, it can't be artificial. It's got to be happening on camera. And if it's done poorly or not just really done seamlessly, it stands out in a bad way. So Grave Encounters 2, it really kind of follows right after the first film. But again, like Blair Witch, like some of these others, it's like, hey, you saw what happened to the people in the first film or the first story or whatever, the found footage. Why are you going to go do the same thing? Okay, Grave Encounters 2. Paranormal Activity. I saw the first film when it came out. What was that, like 10 years ago now? No, it was even longer than that. It was like 2010? 2007. So I saw that film when it came out. And I got to admit, I was kind of interested in it. I mean, the idea of like, oh, you can make a film like this. Just put cameras in your house and have your actors convince me and convince the cameras that some things are happening. The problem is your actors aren't the greatest. And even some of the logic in what they do, their decisions, doesn't make sense. Anyway, Paranormal Activity 2, 3, 4, The Marked Ones, The Ghost Dimension, Next of Kin. Bro, that's a lot of movies. That's 7 movies. I didn't realize there were 7 movies in this franchise. I only saw the first one. So as I just kind of kept on this found footage thing, I blasted through all of them. And like I said, all these films, man, it's like opening doors, loud thuds, and just the idea of like people getting dragged and I, I got to say, some of the just most bogus decision making from some of these characters. It's in every one of these films. And so, there's all of these Paranormal Activity films, right? Then I found this other series called Hell House, LLC. This one, I got to say, the first film, I like it. It's not great, but I like it. It's actually doing some really interesting things here because Hell House, the story of the first film, is this group of young people. They're putting on a haunted house, like a fake haunted house, but it's for Halloween. It's opening up. People come through there, they get scared, they get kind of, terrorized or whatever, but, they leave, they go home, they have some drinks, whatever. It's that kind of thing. These people, they find this old hotel, the Abaddon Hotel, somewhere in I don't know, upstate New York or something like that. So they kind of rent this place out, or they buy, I don't remember. Somehow they have permission to use this place. They turn it into their haunted house. They got props, they got all these weird sets in different rooms and different, like in the basement, and it becomes a whole thing. You got to journey through this building to do the haunted house tour. And it does some interesting things because, one, it starts in a way that it's like this kind of fake documentary thing where you're seeing oh, look, here's the account of what happened on this night at the Abaddon Hotel. And you see it from perspective of people's phone cameras or video cameras. You're seeing it from the footage from the people recording themselves as they're building this place, setting it up. You're seeing it from the cameras that are in the facility, right? In this house. So you're getting it from all these different perspectives. And it's also kind of jumping back and forth in time. Because you're seeing the sort of they're not police interviews, but they're I guess documentary interviews with people from the community, or people who were involved or whatever, and what they remember about this night. So it really feels like a documentary, and the found footage is kind of mixed in there. And until you get maybe about a certain point, then it really just becomes found footage. And I think it balances it just enough where you feel like this is actually kind of convincing. The other thing, though, for me at least, is, I've never done one of these haunted house things. And I always feel like they'd just be kind of corny or really instantly fake, where it'd be hard to actually scare someone with these. I guess I always, in my mind, I just think, well, these are just a gag. These are just for fun. I'm not going here and actually going to be scared of anything. Looking at the film, looking at the house and the way it's set up with the props and all the stuff, and then just some of the moments that are caught in the fake or in the found footage, I could see why someone would be scared, though. There are some moments here where you have a character walking through the house with a camera, and they're looking for somebody, or they think they're talking to somebody in the next room. And so the camera's kind of moving around, and sometimes it's not even drawn, attention is not even drawn to it, but something moves in the frame. Or the camera is facing one way, then pans away, and then comes back, and something is different. And I mean, you've got to kind of have an eagle eye to see it, but I saw it a few times. And it's those kinds of things that are, one, it's because you feel like, hey, guy holding the camera, didn't you see that? But also the idea of yeah, that's not possible, but it feels like it could be possible. Did I just not see correctly the first time and that was there before? Or that is missing now. You know what I mean? Like that thing of like you're caught up in stuff. Maybe you're even it's late or you're tired, and the thing where your eye kind of plays tricks with you, or like light hits a certain way, or a shadow falls the wrong way, and you're like, wait, what am I looking at? Wait. So those little things that they don't really mean anything in the moment until they start to add up. Those I think are kind of effective, because I feel like that's the thing we all have experienced in some way or another. It's never caught on camera, of course, but the idea of like, did I just missee something? Or maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. So the first movie really works in that way. It has some kind of mm, terrifying moments, I guess. I mean, it's not truly like scary, but it's got moments where you're like, yeah, I don't want this character to turn this corner, or I don't want to know what's behind that door. And I think part of it is because it doesn't really go so far into explaining what is happening. You're just watching things happen. You're not really sure why or who's doing it, or what entity or presence is behind it all. And just like I said with some of these others, it's like these other films that came after it, Hell House 2, The Abaddon Hotel, it goes into that. It talks about the follow-up, like what happened that night in the original film, and those people, and how the tale of that whole thing has continued. Hell House 3, Lake of Fire. This is about another group of people coming in to think, oh, well, we're going to do what they couldn't do in the first film. We're going to open this house as like a haunted house, or this hotel as a haunted house. And we're going to do it right. And it's going to be like a real show. And of course, the idea is like, nah, same shit happens. And then you've got Hell House LLC Origins, the Carmichael Manor, which leaves the hotel where all these things happen in the first three films. And we go kind of into the backstory of it all now, right? Like the reason that place is what it is because of things that happen at this place over here, the Carmichael Manor. Okay, hey man, I don't care anymore. Like this, you're going too far. Like it's not scary now that you've explained it all. The last one here, Hell House Lineage, this is one that I'm not even clear why. I mean, I kind of am. It just feels like a real. It. Here's the thing. It breaks from the found footage thing. Like it totally just. It's like it's just a film now, and it's a well done film. And I could see where maybe like okay, the director of all these films, Stephen Cognetti, right? All five of these films. If you look at the earliest ones, or at least the first four, they're all found footage, essentially. They've got like bits and the sort of style of documentary, like interviews and that sort of stuff mixed in. But for the most part, put it this way, they look kind of crude, or they look kind of basic. So they don't really inspire a lot of like confidence that there's a really a skillful or talented filmmaker behind these aesthetically, right? So I would only guess that Hell House LLC Lineage, the one that just came out this year, this was maybe an attempt to show like, look, if you're paying attention to this franchise, we can make something that looks like a real film, that looks like something like this quality, that demands to be shown like on the big screen. And it does. It looks like that. It looks legit. It's got great lighting, great camera work, great music. And I just think the thing is like, it's such a break that I mean, if you're like fans of the franchise, I could feel like this is just weird. Because if you're fans of that film or these films, that's probably a big part of it is the whole found footage thing. And that's kind of the game with all of these, you know? I think the game with all of these films is to make them convincing. And, you know, look, I skipped over all the paranormal activities, right? I think the first two films are pretty strong in that regard. They're pretty convincing, I think. I think four and the Ghost Dimension and Next of Kin is also kind of a departure, right? Because that goes off into like Amish territory or whatever. Like we're in like some really weird place with that film. The marked ones, I think, is it does work. It's not really a sequel. It doesn't follow the same story of the sisters, Katie and Christy, and the whole like the, the curse and all that stuff from 1 through 4 and the ghost dimension, all that, right? Those are all kind of related. The marked ones, I guess it's like a spinoff. But the marked ones is interesting because it's in a very different culture. It's in a very different setting. It's in this, you know, Mexican American household or, you know, group of friends. And it just feels so different. And yet it feels like something like I understand more. The characters, I feel like I know people like this. And even some of the situations, I'm like, that kind of seems familiar. And of course, you know, the whole idea like this is kind of revolving around like brujeria or you know the sort of like Mexican like witchcraft or whatever. I mean, maybe there's some way that that could work. I think the idea though that these are all essentially ghost stories and they really kind of because they're all found footage, they all kind of lean on the same tricks. You know, again, it's like doors, thuds, and people just being tossed around or yanked around. And so, you know, that's where I feel like this one, these paranormal activity movies, they really beat that horse to death. You know, there's nothing left on the bone with those, I think. And it's funny because Next of Kin, if I remember right, that also just came out. Was it last year or this year? I mean, it's pretty recent. And I just would have assumed that, like, yeah, that was done. When did that come out? Paranormal. Can't spell. Oh, no, that was 2021. You know, Next of Kin, that just came out in 2021. So you would think, like, that was a pretty good run, but it's time to kind of let it be now, right? Like, just kind of let that one, let that one just fade away now. And so, look, that I don't even know how many films that is now. I'd have to count these all up. Um, but let's see, what are the film here? Oh, here's another one, which, you know, I actually found this was kind of it was referenced a few times in looking for found footage films as like an inspiration for a lot of filmmakers going into this territory. And that is a film called Lake Mungo. And you know, I don't remember ever hearing about this film. If I remember right, it's Australian, and it's it's probably if I had to like just blindly pick, like this is probably the most convincing of all of these films. Like in terms of the found footage thing, in terms of the sort of verisimilitude of it, of like this feels real. like this looks like real things that happen to real people. And, it doesn't rely on, I don't feel like it relies on tricks. It even, like, it doesn't even really say, or doesn't really show moments of, let's say, of terror. You know, it, the way it really plays, it's more like a documentary about a missing girl. You've seen interviews with, like, locals or like the family, people involved with like the investigation and stuff. And so it plays like you're just watching like a true crime thing or something. And the footage, because this was 2008, the footage that's shown here, it looks like legit, like degraded, like you would think. Some of it is film footage, some of it is video footage, right? Or it's like really rough quality. And it kind of has that aesthetic that I think it feels more scary than it actually is. Like if you watch it out of context, you might not really think too much of it. But when you watch it in the film itself and how it's a part of the story, it feels all the more terrifying. And so, you know, I- like I said, I wouldn't really consider it a horror movie necessarily. It has elements of, I don't know, I guess like psychological horror, where your mind kind of just goes down these holes of like, well, could that be? And what does that really mean? Right. And even the idea of seeing things that maybe aren't there. But it's not like there are no monsters in it. There's no like demons in it. And and let me jump back here because there's one other film I want to talk about here that I thought sounded, honestly, it sounded like a joke. But as I watched it, I was like, oh, okay. No, wait. The folks behind Deadstream from 2022, they really committed to the bit here. They really went pretty deep in trying to make this thing feel like the real thing. And this film, Deadstream, is from, just a few years ago, but it really leans into, let's just take shots at these weird and wild YouTubers that are just doing all these stupid pranks and these videos that are clearly for clicks, for views. They're not here for any serious reason. They're jokesters. And now you could say that about a lot of things, I guess, but or a lot of content on YouTube. And I say YouTube, but this is really, he's like a Twitch streamer, or the equivalent of that in this film universe. But he's someone who's live streaming his night. He's going to stay the night for a sponsor. He's going to stay the night in this like abandoned, like a haunted house or whatever. And the film kind of starts out where you're like learning about like some of the weird, wild stunts and pranks and stuff that he's done, and how his personality is a part of that, right? And so you don't really get a sense of like who he is. You just get a sense of what he's about and what he's done. And some of it is kind of off the wall. Some of it is clearly like very familiar if you watched people who do some dumb shit on YouTube. But this film, it also has something darker that it's trying to say. Here's a guy who is like, for money, going to quote unquote, kind of put his life on the line and stay in this haunted house. And he kind of jokes about it to begin with, and he kind of doesn't take it too serious. But then he's also kind of leaning into like, "Ooh, it's scary. Ooh, what's that?" Because that's how you keep eyes on you, right? And as the film goes on, it becomes clear like something happened to him. There was some other like controversy or scandal or some sort of incident that he was involved in that he is trying to come back from. And I think that's an interesting sort of angle for all this, is that it's not quite, I know what you did last summer. It's not like, oh, he, hurt somebody, although he actually did hurt somebody. But it's more of like his callousness is what got him into trouble, not his action so much. And so here's someone who not only is kind of doing this dumb stuff, but he's also now facing some consequences in some really unexplained ways, because it is a haunted house and there really are these like ghosts or whatever, monsters even. And yeah, they're coming for that ass. And so part of it is like it actually is kind of funny in some ways. And it's more like dark comedy, I guess, but it has elements where you're like, I'm watching this because this is just so ridiculous now. And this guy, while you could say, oh, maybe he's kind of a funny guy, he's actually just a clown. And it's more funny to see how everything in this film just has him on his heels. So, man, how many films have I just talked about? That is way too many films. Oh, wow. 26? Did I count right? 26 films. Okay, well, this was my October for 2025, watching all these films. And don't forget the last one here. The last one I got to talk about, I got to come back to it, Shelby Oaks. Look, this is a film that, like I said at the beginning, it's by a YouTuber who has a following, who has a reputation, who has a kind of a distinct point of view on films and what makes good films. And this was his attempt at making his own film, at creating his own work. And if you have not seen any of the films I just talked about, I think Shelby Oaks will work for you. And if you have seen, I don't know, even a handful of the films I've talked about, though, I think you'll start to see a lot of what informed Shelby Oaks. And some of that is the found footage stuff. Some of it is the kind of fake documentary approach. Another part of it is the sort of ghost hunting, like the group of young people. You might also see the idea of like, oh, there's either some sort of witch or ghost or demon behind everything that's happening. Even the thing of like a relative or like a sister or someone who is like a loved one who's trying to retrace the steps of what happened to somebody else, somebody they care about, someone they've lost. That's also in Shelby Oaks. There's a lot in here in this movie that, look, you could look at it two ways of like, you know what, I'm going to take all these great ideas and kind of roll them into a unique ball of wax and make something that at least has my own spin on it. Great. I like the idea. I like the approach. Nothing is really new anymore, right? And at the same time, you could say, well, look, I mean, let's pick a lane and kind of stick with it, because some of these other films, they've run into this same problem of you start in one specific kind of narrow type of storytelling and you really dial it in and you make it work. But then when you kind of throw so many other things into it, then you just get like a real grab bag of ideas. And sometimes I feel like it just dilutes the effectiveness of it. And so with Shelby Oaks, I feel like there's enough here that works, I think. But at some point, when it just kind of abandons all of the distinct touches of those different elements, and it just kind of becomes just straight like conventional horror film towards the end. I don't know. I feel like, man, it has so much like promise and so much of a spin on it at the beginning, and it works in some really interesting ways, but it also has just enough of like kind of glaring tropes where I would have thought, no, 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 that would be something that Chris Stuckman would point out in another film. So why is it in his film? A character is walking in the dark in some like abandoned prison with a flashlight. It's the middle of the night. There are no lights on. A flashlight. And just at the moment where the character is about to discover something or walk into a certain room that's going to mean something to the story, the flashlight, the light goes out, the battery dies. Of course. Like, how is that a thing in a Chris Stuckman film? Really, in anybody's film. It's not necessarily a personal thing, but it's like that's something we've seen 1,000 times. How in Blair Witch they have infinite battery life on these cameras. In this film, for all we know, she's not had this flashlight on very long, and the battery dies. Let's make up our minds. What are we doing? So that's where I feel like there are little elements like that that kind of undermine the the intention, but also the spirit of a film like this. And like I said, it's not to say it's bad. I enjoyed some of it. I enjoyed it for the most part. But honestly, look, a final kind of resolution or decision for the main character that really doesn't make any sense. I That was the hardest thing to take. Is a character that makes a decision regarding a child and the nature of this child and what to do with this child and makes a decision that does not hold water. I'm sorry. Given everything we've seen in the film, I can't get behind it. I'm sorry. So anyway, all right, that's enough. This is probably the longest episode I've ever done, possibly. But this is also a ton of movies, I know. So look, that's it for me for this episode. I know it's been a minute, but this has actually kind of been interesting to just go on a run like this and talk about them all at once. And I'm sure there are some others I probably missed, but if there's a found footage film that a horror film specifically that you think is really kind of worth seeing, let me know. You go to filmstreak.com. You can leave a comment there, or you can get at me, I guess, if you know how to get at me. Otherwise, check out some other episodes, or if you want to see the list of all the films, over 700 now. Shoot, we're almost at 750. So anyway, that's it for me for now. I'll talk to you later. My voice is running out. Until then, you know what to do. Go watch something new.